The sound of chants condemning the US have filled the streets of the Iranian capital. Protesters have come out in solidarity with their government, which has fired more than a dozen missiles at 2 US military bases in Iraq. The strike is in retaliation for Washington's assassination of the nation's top general, Qasem Soleimani.
It's just getting started. As our leader said, if they hit us once, we will hit them 10 times. Today, only 2 were carried out. We are proud that we took revenge before Soleimani's burial.
Speaking in public for the first time since the general's death in Iraq, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei outlined his government's goal.
Military action like this is not sufficient. What is important is ending the corruption presence of America in the region.
Iran says 80 Americans have been killed, but the US hasn't reported any casualties.
All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good. We have the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world by far. I will be making a statement tomorrow morning.
While US President Donald Trump has shrugged off Iran's attack, the escalation has roiled financial markets. Stocks in the US, Europe, and Asia have extended their losses. Oil prices have risen over fears the conflict could disrupt global crude supplies. And the safe haven asset gold has reached a 7-year peak above $1,600 an ounce.
People are nervous. People, you open the news and you see there is more to happen of strikes from the US versus Iran, and people get panicked. So what's the first thing to do is to convert some of their investment into gold.
With world leaders from Asia to Europe calling for dialogue, Iran says that its strikes are the conclusion of its retaliation to Soleimani's killing. Tehran says it has no intention of deepening the conflict, but has warned it's ready to respond to any further action by the US. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, for more, we have Luciano Zaccara in Doha. He's a professor at Qatar University's Gulf Studies Center and is writing a book on Iranian foreign policy under President Hassan Rouhani. We're also joined by Ramin Asgard in New York. He's a vice president at the investment firm First Pathway Partners. He was also a senior advisor to US Generals David Petraeus and James Mattis. Welcome to you both. Now, Ramin, if I could first start with you. We heard there from Donald Trump saying that he believes Iran is now standing down after those missile attacks on US assets in Iraq. Is that your assessment of the situation as well?
Thank you very much, Oscar. It seems that there will be some sort of a strategic pause, an assessment of conditions on the ground. The claim that the goal was to have U.S. forces withdraw from the region seems to be somewhat far off. But this is the beginning of a process which seems to now be at strategic pause, and hopefully there will be some way to instill some dialogue into the process to continue de-escalating.
Luciano, can I ask you the same question? Now, Donald Trump says Iran is probably going to stop its retaliation against the US. Do you think that's the case as well?
Well, I think it seems possible, since Zarif said that he considered that the operation was done, that he considered that there was enough, the operation that they conducted yesterday in the 2 air bases. And it seems that Trump accepted that as enough retaliation for what the action that the United States decided to take the other day. So if both decide that it's enough, that we don't need to further escalate the situation, it seems that we're going to see at least a little bit more calm situation in the future. But it seems, but it depends on how this is accepted by both public opinions, both in Iran and the United States, because there is still doubt about whether there were people that they died or not. It depends on how you understand the situation and how you accept whether there were casualties or not. It will be more acceptable or not for both public opinions and for political and military establishment in both countries.
Now, Ramin, can I ask you, as someone who's advised the former top US generals Petraeus and Mattis, do you believe that this action that was conducted by Donald Trump against Qasem Soleimani was one that was warranted? We're told that it's something that US administrations in the past have considered, but I guess didn't ultimately pull the trigger. Do you think Trump was right in doing what he did?
Trump, as commander-in-chief, made a decision that this was an appropriate countermeasure and that there was an imminent threat. Obviously, the imminent threat information is highly classified and isn't likely to be shared. Whether it was right to escalate at that level to someone that senior inside another sovereign country is something basically that, you know, those are the kinds of decisions that the president has to make. Right now, the consequences are still playing out. But it was a major escalation. It was one that had been contemplated before several times, and the president decided to pull the trigger.
Okay.
Now we'll see. We'll see. But essentially, that's the decision that was reached, and now U.S. military forces are on alert to respond to whatever happens.
Now, Luciano, can I ask you about the wider consequences across the region? Obviously, in the wake of this attack against Soleimani, Iran has pledged not only to attack US assets, but also its allies in the region, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and of course its long-standing enemy, Israel. Do you think Tehran is in any way in a capacity to launch such retaliations or retribution against this attack? We know the Iranian economy is in very bad shape, made even worse by sanctions from the United States. Is this a hollow threat from Iran or something that they are seriously considering, do you think?
Well, Iran has been bragging all this time about their capacity to do any kind of military action. If we consider that Iran had something to do with what happened in Aramco in September, or what happened with the oil tankers in June in Fujairah and the Gulf of Oman, we have to admit that Iran showed some kind of capability to affect the economies and the infrastructure of other countries without suffering any retaliation from the other side, from either Saudi Emirates or the United States. So it proved that they can harm if they want to do it. The problem is, what I think is that the message that Iran wanted to give to the G7 is that they don't want to do it. If they are not forced to do it, they prefer not to do it. And in this case, it was clear after the assassination of Soleimani that most of the G7 states, they made clear to Iran that they had nothing to do with this decision, that they were not even informed about the action taken by the United States. This way, they tried not to be related to the decision. And it seems that Iran, even though they are threatening that they can retaliate to any military installation located in a third country, Iran is not interested in targeting assets from other countries, but only American interests in those countries. So Iran, of course, if you are confronting a global power with bases not only in their own country, but distributed along the region, the only way that Iran can retaliate the United States is by attacking the bases, the American bases that they are located not in the US, but in the region. The other point is that which countries Iran can select in order to retaliate, whether in Iraq or other countries. It seems that now the situation is more located into Iraq because the situation is happening in Iraq, and they don't want to engage in or to broaden the scope of confrontation with the United States, that now they are not in that page.
Okay, now Ramin, another aspect to these rising tensions is, of course, the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Iran now says that it will no longer abide by any of the requirements of the deal, namely the limits that have been outlined on the enrichment of uranium. Does this mean, do you think, that the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, is officially dead and buried?
That's a very good point. I think this is the time that the other parties to the deal can step forward, the Russians, the Chinese, Germans, the British, and reaffirm that they're committed and perhaps play some sort of mediating role to try to keep the deal somewhat intact. Because the president, the first thing he said when he made his address this morning was regarding Iran never having access to a nuclear weapon. So that remains the U.S. priority. The deal is now obviously weakened by this escalation, this military escalation. However, the other countries are not going to stand idly by and watch this situation cascade. They will step up, and I expect them to make some sort of statement that reaffirms their commitment, and then hopefully can talk Iran back into at least engaging to the point. Remember, the president brought up today the possibility of a new deal, some other deal, some other forward progress of abandoning nuclear weapons and going towards something like economic prosperity in the region with Iran involved. So that's going to require all the parties in the Security Council to step forward and make their voices heard and hopefully have a mediating effect on the United States and Iran.
Okay, Ramin Asgard in New York and Luciano Zaccara in Doha. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you both so much for your analysis on this crucial story. Thank you.